Okay. Okay. Here we go. Um, so we can see where, so the top one is Bybit's interest on the inverse. This is Bybit inverse open interest. This is aggregated stable coin linear futures, aka stable coin margin futures. This is the open interest aggregated. And this is denominated in Bitcoin, by the way. That's why this is so much lower. This is 123,000 Bitcoin. This open interest is for inverse futures, aka coin margin futures, and this is denominated in dollars because that's how they are sized. Linear futures are sized in Bitcoin, which is why the open interest is in Bitcoin, whereas inverse futures are sized in dollars, why the open interest is sized in dollars. This is inverse. Inverse. An I. Inverse. Linear. Inverse. Inverse means the same thing as coin margin. Linear means the same thing as stable coin margin. Okay. So things to understand. When you trade stablecoin margined derivatives, that means that by default your margin is in dollars. That means that by default you have no long exposure. That means that in order to have any long exposure, you have to open up a position, meaning that open interest will go up. So what this means is that it is entirely possible for people to open up positions on linear futures, aka stable coin margin futures, where they're still not liquidatable, meaning that you can open up positions, long positions. You can open up long positions on stablecoin margin futures with a liquidation price below zero. That is not the case for inverse futures. So linear futures have a default USD long, aka no Bitcoin exposure. Inverse futures, your margin is in Bitcoin, meaning that you're already 1x long your margin, meaning that even a single contract will give you a liquidation price. You could have $1 billion of margin on inverse futures in Bitcoin and open up a $1 position. You will have a liquidation price that's non-zero because as the price of Bitcoin drops, your margin will lose value. You're already 1x long. So what that means is that as Bitcoin drops, the most dangerous thing to see is seeing inverse futures open interest go up. Because what that means, so remember, when open interest goes up, that for open interest is the total of longs and shorts open for an exchange or some number of exchanges. It's always 50% longs and 50% shorts. Okay? But what you need to understand is that, like, as things start dumping, for example, people will start getting liquidated on their longs. And these longs, so if you look at this, you see how we dumped here? And you see how open interest went up? You may tell yourself, oh, look at how many people open shorts here. Like, you know, but just as many people who opened shorts also opened longs, at least inside of the exchange, right? In terms of, like, maybe they're hedging some other place. It's not a closed system entirely, but if we see that total open interest on inverse futures went from 4.4 billion up to 4.6 billion, that's like a $200 million. That's like a $200 million increase in open interest. That means that was $100 million of people adding to shorts and $100 million of people adding to longs. The shorts don't really matter if we drop. Those people will just make money and eventually close. The problem is the longs. There's $100 million of people that have longed here on inverse futures with a liquidation price above zero. Every single one of these $100 million of positions have a non-zero liquidation price. And that is the risk The problem is that 100 million people opened up inverse futures longs with a non-zero liquidation price here. And that is jet fuel if we dump. Those guys are going to get liquidated. Yeah, the shorts will also have to close, fine, but the shorts won't close. The people will get liquidated long before the shorts close. So here's what happens. Price starts dropping, people start getting liquidated on their longs, but shorts don't start buying yet. So there's no buyers and there's only sellers. So all of the people who were long, who longed over here, these guys who longed here, become sellers once we start dipping. And then only once we get the final push, that's when we get that final push, that's when the people that were shorting here start closing. The point is that people get liquidated on their longs before the shorts start closing. Is it choppy? Am I dropping frames? Doesn't look like I'm dropping frames. Interesting. Okay, hold on a second. Maybe I should restart. Oh, my great. Good now? Fine-ish. Let's again. I restarted, that's all. All right, how's that? Good? Alive? Not too laggy? Good stuff. Okay. Somebody asked, how do I know that there's that spec? How do I tell there's a non-zero liquidation price? So that's what I was explaining. Inverse futures, aka coin margin futures, always have a non-zero liquidation price. By definition, inverse futures, aka coin margin futures, are always collateralized in Bitcoin for Bitcoin USD pairs, meaning that you're already 1x long before you even open a position because your entire spot collateral is long Bitcoin, meaning that even a $1 contract will give you a liquidation price. Parlez-vous français? No, I do not parlez-vous français. Anyways, yeah, so you basically are already going to why buy spot? I don't buy spot. What do you mean? You have to have spot collateral to trade futures. Right? This isn't about trading spot. This isn't about trading spot. This is about holding collateral. You have to have something. What's your margin? And you don't have any margin, you can't trade. Won't let you trade. So the point is that people are margined in Bitcoin here. You have to have spot. You have to have spot something. You have to have dollars. You have to have Bitcoin. You have to have something to trade. If you don't have money, you can't trade. Stable coins, I consider stablecoin spot. Yeah, if you trade linear futures, you are perfectly allowed to hold dollars. Collateral can be in USD for collateral. It's not about whether it can be in USD. Okay, start over. By definition, linear futures are collateralized in USD. These linear futures, this is USD. USD. Oh, that's terrible. USD. But these guys are not. These are by definition not. So whether it's not a strat, I'm not telling you which to trade. I'm just telling you that people trade these. So we know for a fact that these guys are fully exposed to Bitcoin on their margin. It's not a debate about whether it's good or bad. I'm not telling you that they should be doing this. Yeah, sure, trade linear futures for yourself. That's not the point. The point is that people are trading this. And so we know that anybody who's trading this guy is 100% going to be fully exposed to spot Bitcoin on their collateral. It's not a debate about whether that's good or bad. It's just a fact. And that means that when Bitcoin starts dumping, if it starts dumping, every single one of these positions, every single dollar of long open interest has a non-zero liquidation price. You can flip the logic here though. By default, everybody here has no Bitcoin exposure. That means that every single dollar of short open interest has a non-infinite liquidation price. So it's just reverse logic. That's all. So here's the point. The point is that when Bitcoin denominated open interest goes up, aka inverse futures, aka coin margin futures, when this stuff goes up, that is jet fuel for a dump, because these guys are all liquidatable. Every single dollar of long interest. So this is $200 million, 4.4 bill up to 4.6. This is $200 million of open interest. Divided by 2, that $200 million divided by 2 is $100 million of long open interest. That $100 million of long open interest is going to give you $100 million. Sorry, that $200 million of open interest is $100 million of long open interest. That is all people ready to be liquidated. It can't be shorts. It's $200 million of open interest, meaning it's exactly $100 million of long open interest. Every open interest is exactly 50% longs and 50% shorts. That means that if open interest went from 4.4 billion to 4.6 billion, by definition, that is $100 million of longs that have added. It's also $100 million of shorts, but it's also $100 million of longs. And here's what happens when price starts dumping. When price starts dumping, what happens is the shorts don't close here. They're not providing bids yet, but guess who's getting fucked right now? The longs, so what happens is price goes down, okay? And then the first thing that happens is longs start getting fucked, but shorts don't close their shorts yet. These guys start getting fucked. They add extra sell pressure. When you get liquidated on a long, you have to sell. So they become more sellers, providing jet fuel for a dump. So you end up with a multiplier here where you get more sell pressure. And then finally at the bottom, the shorts close, providing buy pressure. And they finally save the day, eventually. The problem is that before the buyers come in, before shorts close, longs get liquidated. That's the problem. Yeah, it's 50-50. Sure, it's 50-50. But they're not going to behave the same. Just because it's 50-50 longs and shorts doesn't mean they behave the same. So what happens is the very first thing that happens is longs start getting liquidated, providing more sell pressure. And eventually the buyers step in, closing out their shorts, adding to longs. You get even more buy pressure. But by then, everyone who isn't smart has been fucked. How do you see shorts closing on the open interest chart? Remember, on futures, everything works in pairs. For every $1 of long, there's a dollar of short. So there is no way, shorts can't close. Like you can't have shorts closing without longs closing. So if you see open interest go down, you know shorts are closing. Sure, longs are also closing. Open interest can move in one of three ways. Okay, imagine two people on an exchange. If you imagine two people, okay, two people, they're a counterparty to each other. If one of them is a buyer for $1, then the other one has to be the seller because they have to match, right? Either open interest for $1. If I place a buy order for $1 and I get filled, somebody else was selling for $1. If I'm opening up a position, then my counterparty is either opening a position or closing a position. If I'm opening a position and they're opening a position for that $1 fill, open interest goes up $2 because I'm adding, they're adding. If I'm opening a position and they're closing a position, open interest is flat. I'm adding, but they're closing, and that's a net zero on open interest. And if I'm closing a position and they're closing a position, open interest goes down $1 for me, $1 for them. So open interest always moves either up. For every $1 fill you see, open interest is either moving up $2, staying flat, or moving down $2. So if you look at trade history and you see a $1 fill, open interest by definition has to move up $2, stay flat, or move down $2. That's how it works. Does that make sense? That's the definition of open interest. You can't, if you look at open interest, there's no world where you can have more sellers than you can't have more shorts than longs. Like every long has to have a short counterparty. Does that make sense? So that's just how open interest works. Nice. Okay. Yeah, funding is part. I mean, there's a lot of other things that go into how this makes it work, but that's the idea. Okay, so basically, this is to get back to what we were trying to talk about. The risk you've got here, the risk you have is when things dump, when things start dumping, and you see coin margin, aka inverse futures, open interest go up. That's when you get scared, because this leads to this problem I just talked about. But does this make sense now? This whole problem here, where you get people getting liquidated first before the shorts close, this is the risk you have. This situation is the risk you get when you see coin margin open interest go up. Linear futures are less of a risk. They still are a risk, but less of a risk. The thing with linear futures is that they're not guaranteed to be liquidation. These people could be opening positions under 1x leverage, meaning that they're not inherently liquidatable. So these guys may or may not be a risk. They're not explicitly as much of a risk as the inverse guys are. They are still a risk because plenty of these guys are trading above 1x. What is the actual difference between coin margin contracts, open interest chart? Coin margin is a type of future. The open interest is the amount of contracts open for some exchange or something. Okay, linear futures, coin margin futures they are the ones that you hold. Linear futures, aka stable coin margin futures. Do they all go against BTC? What do you mean? Do they all go against BTC? Try that again, Arbus. I want to answer your question. I'm just not following. The second chart? No, they don't always go against BTC. It just happens that people are buying and people are more aggressively trading. People are adding to their positions more aggressively on linear futures right now. Shorts are adding, longs are adding. But that's not as big of a deal. Why do so many people trade coin margin futures? That's almost more of a historical phenomenon. The original perpetual swap, aka the original perpetual future, was the XBT USD inverse perpetual swap on BitMEX. Back in the day, in BitMEX I think this is changing soon. Back in the day, BitMEX only offered Bitcoin wallet deposits, meaning that you could only hold Bitcoin. If you can only hold Bitcoin, the only kind of futures that make sense are inverse futures, aka coin margin futures. So Bitcoin invented the inverse perpetual swap, and it was the most traded asset in crypto for like a year or two. So a lot of it is historical. There are other reasons. I mean, I genuinely enjoy sizing my positions in dollars. I have a very hard time sizing my position in Bitcoin, and inverse futures are by definition sized in dollars, whereas linear futures are sized in Bitcoin. So I prefer a lot of that. I also like getting paid out in Bitcoin versus in dollars for my collateral for my P&L. So anyways, the point is when things are going down, inverse futures open interest is your risk. When things are going up, linear futures open interest is the risk. But the truth is that when things are going up, the squeezes are not nearly as bad. So the only, did I mix it up? Linear futures get paid in USD. I may have mixed it up. Okay, one more time. Linear futures, aka stablecoin margin futures, aka this guy here, is sized in Bitcoin and P&L is paid out in US dollars. Inverse futures, aka coin margin futures, are sized in dollars and paid out in Bitcoin. What are the sounds in the background? Agger. I always have Agger going. Agger.trade. I don't really know what else to say about this. This is, I mean, just like this is just how, yeah, this is the modern landscape of crypto futures. Funding open interest is high, but funding seems kind of low still. There's not a direct relationship between funding and open interest. So I don't, you may be looking for a relationship that doesn't it's not a direct relationship, but I mean obviously they matter together, but they're not like one-to-one impacting each other. Maybe you're stupid, but it's much easier to calculate, predicts trading and stablecoin. No, you're correct, True Sight. That's one of the things. So inverse futures are a little bit more complicated for coming up with the saying Gokul. I'm sorry, I keep. Would you? Yeah, I think I got it. Did I get it? I can try and talk a little more about open interest. Open interest is, or sorry, about funding. Funding is much more complicated actually than open interest. Open interest is very straightforward. What time frame do you use on open interest generally? I use dollar. Sorry, I use an hour. I use the hourly for everything. I just trade the hourly. So you should look at open interest on whatever time frame you're trading. Yes, no, True Sight. Okay, so here's, oh boy. Okay, let's just do a little bit of math. This may blow your mind, but they actually are the same payout. So give me a second. I'm gonna open. Let me open this. Hang tight. This is. Let me see if I can blow your guys' mind here. All right. Hold on. All right. Watch this. I know you can't see. Hang on. Everybody relax. Okay. We're going to do two different calculations, okay? Let's do some math. You ready? This is the BitMEX calculator for P&L, etc. I'm very used to it. If you're not used to it, you'll figure it out. It's just a calculator. I just am used to it. Imagine you buy $10,000. The inverse, these are inverse futures, okay? Imagine you buy $10,000 worth of Bitcoin. $10,000 worth of Bitcoin at $10,000. Your entry price is $10,000. Your quantity is $10,000. You effectively bought one Bitcoin worth at $10,000. If you exit at $20,000, how much money do you make? You make 0.5 Bitcoin. What is 0.5 Bitcoin at $20,000? That's $10,000 because you made half a Bitcoin, you exited at 20K, and 50% of 20K is $10,000. Now, imagine you do the math for linear futures. You buy one Bitcoin worth of futures on linear futures at $10,000. Bitcoin goes up to $20,000. You still have one Bitcoin long. How much did you make? Well, you made the difference between your entry and your exit. You made $10,000. You made the same exact amount of money. So This is actually like, there's a big misconception that for like the idea that you should be longing on like long on linear futures and short inverse futures is not correct. The P&L is the same. The only difference is your margin exposure. The math is more complicated. The reason this works, the reason why this math works is because the P&L you make early on that gets paid out in Bitcoin is worth more later on because Bitcoin went up in value. Does that make sense? So when you trade inverse futures, the size doesn't change as Bitcoin goes up. So if I buy $10,000 worth of inverse futures, at $20,000 per Bitcoin, I'll only have 0.5 Bitcoin long open now. Whereas if I traded on linear futures and I bought one Bitcoin at $10,000, by $20,000, I would have a one Bitcoin long on still. So my position size denominated in Bitcoin would be half as much on my inverse trade by the time Bitcoin hits 20,000. But because the P&L was paid out in Bitcoin along the way, that makes up exactly the difference. So the P&L you made early on that was paid out in Bitcoin is now worth more later on because Bitcoin went up in value, and it exactly cancels out the difference. The point is, you make exactly the same amount of money on linear futures and inverse futures. The only difference is that your margin is different. So your exposure from your margin makes a difference. And your P&L is paid out differently, so you have to decide if you want to convert it. But that's it. Okay, that's enough. We have longs potentially getting liquidated in coin margin. Don't we have shorts getting potentially liquidated and stuff? Yes, you nailed it. Okay, great. Thank you, real Anita Simp. So you are 100% correct that the relationship is exactly flipped. The difference is in how price. Yo, it's working for me. Okay, is anybody else getting lag? Because it's working. I've got my stream open on another computer, and it looks like it's not lagging. Can anybody confirm whether it's lagging? No lag. Good. Cool. So here's the difference. The difference is that the difference between the sell problem we have here, where coin margin gets fucked, compared to the if we imagine that this is the same issue but reversed on USD margin, the problem is that FTX is lagging. Wait, what? Oh, that might be a different problem. The difference is that when markets go up, the squeezes are different. The type of squeezes you get on a dump is not the same as the type of squeezes you get on a pump. So it's just that buy dynamics and buy side dynamics are not the same as sell side dynamics, and because it's so much more dangerous on a dump, people get more fucked when Bitcoin dumps than when it pumps. So it's not that you don't have the same problem. It's just that the reality is that dumps are much more dangerous for liquidation. So this problem is so much more relevant on the sell side than it is on the buy side. But in theory, the math is the same. So it is true that people shorting Bitcoin with on linear futures with USD as their stable. The second they open up a $1 short, no matter how much money they have, they're going to have a liquidation price below infinity. But if you are on inverse futures and you open up a $1 contract, as long as you're under 1x short relative to your margin, you will not have a liquidation price. Your liquidation price will be infinite, because as you lose money on your short position, your collateral will appreciate at least as much. So yes, it's the same thing in reverse. The difference is that buy side and sell side dynamics are different. Does it make sense to pay for scalping training? Probably not. No. It makes sense to journal, work on trading, do all this stuff, Put in the effort. Look, it's like trading is very much an experience driven skill, and the idea of studying in a book or paying for expensive courses, while it's not completely useless, I believe that you're never going to become a great trader by studying in that way. You've got to just trade, whether you're trading on paper accounts or whatever. It doesn't matter, but you're paying for content isn't going to take you where you want to go. Maybe pay for contents if you're like, if you plateau, for example, and you feel like you're not making any progress. I'd say maybe that might be a time to consider it. But in general, you've got to just trade. Go through. I go through my Medium article on beginner's guide to learning futures. I talk about a lot of the habits that you should try and use to focus on improving. And there's no course, there's no book, there's nothing out there that's going to compare to you just doing it. But what you need to do is not go broke while doing it. So you need to trade to get better, but you also need to not go broke while trading, while learning. And that's the art. The true art of getting good at trading is, how do I trade while learning without losing everything? And I don't have a good answer there. It's a combination of focusing on learning, not having lots of discipline, small size. I'm even an advocate of paper trading. I know people just throw it out the window, but I tell you what, if I have to choose between you going broke learning to trade or you learning to trade with paper money, fuck that. Learn to trade with a paper account, okay? So the risk of you making big mistakes, especially right when you start, are so huge that you really should just use a paper account for a few weeks at least. You can always trade with $100, but some people get out of control. They lose $100, they deposit more. I mean, I know how this goes. If you've got the self-control, then that's better. I agree. But I don't think everyone does. And I've been there. So do whatever you have to do to not lose it all. Okay? That's all you, like, if you need to use a paper account for a little while. Yeah, the other thing that people don't ever give any credence to is that the platforms take a little while to learn. And so, like, you don't need to trade real money to get used to trading, like, how do I use a stop loss? How do I use a stop market? How do I use a mark price? How does isolated versus cross margin work? Like, these are not things that you need to lose real money on, So, like, if you're like still trying to figure out how all these things work, like how do all these different order types work? How does the different margin mechanisms work? Why would you, like, if you don't understand how, like, the different types of stop orders, or you don't understand cross versus isolated margin, you should not be trading with real money, because those are not skills that depend on you. Money management skills are not the same as just understanding the mechanism. You can learn the mechanism of trading first on a paper account, so that when you fuck up on your stop order or you do something really stupid, you don't lose real money. And then once you're comfortable with all the different order types, you're comfortable with the different ways to use margin, you're comfortable with different types of leverage, then maybe you need to start learning how to manage risk, emotion, all that stuff. Emotion management has nothing to do with understanding how stop orders work, right? So if you don't understand how, like, all these different order types work and all these different mechanisms work, learn that first. And you don't need to use real money to learn that, Anyways. So, so I would say if you're still, like, in that camp, you should take a minute, where to find knowledge and all the basic stuff. Look, trading futures is complicated. It's not simple no matter how you slice it, but, trading small is better for learning, unless you don't understand how. If you can't tell me, here's a quiz, okay? If you're trading with real money, but you can't answer this quiz, you should be not trading with real money yet. You need to be able to explain cross leverage versus isolated. You need to understand the stop limit order versus a stop market order and when to use the different ones. You need to understand the different trigger prices, mark price, index price, last price for the different types of stop orders. You need to understand taker versus maker fees. You need to understand post reduce. You should understand close on trigger for stop orders. If you don't know all of those things, that has nothing to do with emotion management. That's like somebody put you in a space shuttle and you don't even know how to like operate all the controls. So if you like are still unsure about these mechanisms, you should learn the mechanisms. Like, don't get in the space shuttle until you know how it works, especially not with real money. There's no shame. Just make a paper account and just fuck around for a couple days or a week. And then and really try all the different orders. Experiment with how they all work and get a feel for how it all works. And once you've gotten a feel for it, then you should maybe start trading real money. But like, imagine you're trading futures and you don't understand how these things work. I'll tell you what, your counterparty does, okay? You're trading against me. You don't know how like a stop market versus a stop limit works. You don't understand the maker versus the taker fees. You don't understand post versus reduce orders. Well, I'll tell you what, I fucking do, and I'm the one who's gonna be taking your money when you make a mistake. So don't let your counterparty who does understand how this shit works take your money. Learn how it works for, like, it's the most basic thing you could do. Like, it doesn't take any like big brain emotional management stuff. Trading is hard, right? Trading is hard. You know what's not hard? Learning how the like mechanisms work. It just takes time. Like, you know, just that's how it works. Trust me, your counterparty knows how this shit works. So if you don't know how it works, you're already like, how are you supposed to beat your counterparty if you don't even understand how like the futures trading works? Anyways, that's my rant. Learn how everything works before you start giving away money to your counterparty. Like, seriously. There's like 10 things, okay? You can write this down if you want. Maker versus taker order fees, fill types. Post reduce orders for limit orders. The stop market versus a stop limit order. Close on triggers for stop orders. Cross collateral versus or cross margin versus isolated margin. And inverse versus linear futures. Those are like the basics. Like, really, that's it. Can I explain post versus reduce? I mean, it's almost like not really worth going too much into it because it really is. Let me see. I'm going to link you some documentation, and then if you have concrete questions about how it works, when would you ever use a stop limit order? You would use a stop limit order if you are using a stop order to enter. Imagine you're using a stop order to enter. You may only want to enter you may only want your trigger order to enter if you can get a good fill. The other times you may use it, I use them on FTX all the time. The way I use them on FTX is I will first use a stop limit order because FTX wicks so nasty through my stops. So what I'll do is I'll put a stop limit order first that tries to get a good fill. So maybe price bounces through the limit price of my stop, but then it comes back down and fills me at a reasonable stop price. But I always put a stop market farther away. So in the worst case that the price just barrels through my stop, it'll hit the stop market. So one of the biggest use cases I have personally for stop limit orders is on an exchange that has a lot of wicks where stop orders can get really expensive. Using stop limits as your first line of defense so that you can try and get a reasonable stop fill, 9 out of 10 times you'll get the stop limit to fill. Price will either bounce back into your stop limit or your limit order after the stop triggers, the limit order hits the book, price will come back down into it. Or maybe it'll just fill before, like you put your limit price a little farther away. Let me show you. Stupid. Here's what it might look like on FTX. Okay, so if imagine I am in a let's put in like a $10 position. Okay, let's put in a short. Okay, cool. So the way I might put a stop order, imagine that this is my let me scroll down. Imagine that my invalidation Imagine that my invalidation is like, imagine that my invalidation is like here, okay? I want to be invalidated here. What I might do is something like this. First, a stop limit order. First of all, I want to reduce on, this is close on trigger. This is the same thing. I don't know why they call it reduce. It should be called close on trigger. Anyways, stop limit. So let's put the trigger price at like 335.30 trigger price. And I'll put the limit price as like 335.60. So that gives me $30 of slippage before which the order won't actually, and this needs to be a buy, right? Right. Position, yeah, works. Size is too small. Buy. Oh, interesting. I just liked, okay, fuck it, whatever. Apparently I can't do that. Let's do, FTX, Jesus. Kidding? Is this joke? Okay, let's try 100. Imagine, okay, just imagine I have $100 short on. So you can see here on FTX, it shows you both the buy limit is your limit price, and the buy stop limit is your trigger price. The risk here is that if price barrels through and slips farther, I may never get filled and get liquidated. So you always need to come back here and put in something. So I might put a stop market at like 337, 80, 85, 86 maybe. So I go over to here, stop market, 337.86. Why not? Wow. Oh, whoops. Haha. Cool. There we go. So that's basically how I do it. Stop market fees on FTX are absurd. Well, the fees are the same as any market order. So the stop market, there's no special fees for stop market orders. It's just market orders are always taker orders. So taker orders are always the same fees. What is absurd is slippage. The slippage is what you mean, I think. There's no special fees. Well, I'm on the highest fee tier. Come on. Come on. What do you think? Think I'm a noob? A pleb? Let me see. Yeah, I'm fee tier 6. Anyways, so this is how I would use a stop limit order. There's like a 90% chance. There's like a 90% chance that this is gonna fill. But in the worst case, it may not fill. I might also put like an alert here too, so that way like I can like, or like maybe I put an alert here so I can